The one thing that makes companies more attractive, more interesting, create more loyalty and advocacy is this customer relationship. And the reality is we're seeing a lot of companies react, maybe overreact to the potential of cost savings. Again, this is the example that we're hearing so much is I have a call center, there's 40 people there. If I put AI in place, I can fire 20 of them.
Welcome to AI Experience, the podcast that demystifies artificial intelligence. My name is Julian Rodelsberger, and we are going to find out how AI is changing the world. And I'm super happy to welcome Jake McKee. He's a community strategist and experience designer with more than 2 decades of experience helping companies like Lego, Apple, and Southwest Airlines build deeper relationships with their most passionate customers. He is also the creator of AIX Sessions, a unique monthly event series designed for candid, senior-level conversation about community, product, and AIX strategy. So today, we are diving into AI and community engagement. In a world where intelligent systems are everywhere, how do we still build real human connection? Is AI making that harder or opening up new possibilities? Can it threaten customer engagement or actually deepen it? I'm thrilled to explore those questions with my guest. Jake, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, my pleasure, Jake. So today we're going to talk a lot about customer engagement, but let's start with something simple but fundamental. How would you define customer engagement today? What does that really mean to you?
Yeah, and I started saying direct customer engagement instead of just customer engagement. I think the idea of customer engagement encompasses a lot of things that may not be really what my work is, right? It could be social media, traditional marketing, email newsletters, all that stuff that you're engaging a customer. But really what I focus on is direct customer engagement. How do you really create connection, communication, interaction between real people, your customers, and real people, your company, your product teams, or your community teams, or really just bringing in that voice of the outside to the inside, and the voice of the inside to the outside as well, but in a very humanistic, direct connection sort of way.
How long have we been talking about customer engagement? Is it something new or has it been around for a very long time?
No, I think it's always been around. I think it has morphed and changed over the years. Depending on what kind of technology options we have, what kind of communication options we have, sizes of companies have gotten bigger over time. If you go back to, the 40s or the 50s, right? You knew very directly the proprietor of the local store that you went and did most of your shopping at, right? They knew you as well. That's direct customer engagement. But over time, as a couple of things have happened, one is as companies have gotten bigger, the conglomerates like Walmart or Target or Amazon's or that sort of thing, they've centralized so much that it becomes more necessary to make an effort to do this direct communication, direct engagement, because it's not as easy as it once was, right? Who do you really know at Amazon? Who do you really know at Target, right? And do they know you at all? Do you believe that they know you at all? Probably not. The other piece of this, of course, was the rise of the web and the internet, and as we got the ability to have communication at scale, which was awesome, we also lost a lot of the individualized communication and the real connection that people we talked to and had deep engagement with that we knew. Well, when you go on an online forum, for instance, you can have years of deep and meaningful connection with somebody you've never met in person. You don't know what they look like. You don't know what they sound like. And so there's some necessity here to really to think about how do you really connect the humanity of both a company and its passionate customers. And in both directions.
So you have a lot of experience in customer engagement, and of course, we're here to talk about artificial intelligence. So how does AI come into play? I mean, were we even talking about AI in your world before ChatGPT was launched in November 2022?
Sort of. So let me answer your first question first. So why are we even talking about AI? And more importantly, why is a community nerd like me talking about AI, right? Isn't AI just technology and I do something very different than technology? Sort of. I think that what we're seeing right now and what we're needing to be thinking more about is what happens with AI as it is currently right now today, changing the way that we all work and think. And AI, treating AI as a creative and critical partner becomes even more important, right? That we're not just sort of turning over our assignments to AI and saying, okay, we're done. The real question is, how are we starting to change our workflows? How are we changing the way that we ideate, right? How do we change the way we brainstorm? Um, you asked, the second question was, have we been talking about AI in the community spaces and the customer engagement spaces before ChatGPT came out? And I will say yes, but much less. The conversations for many years have been, how do we help with things like moderation, right? These very core tasks of keeping community spaces or social media spaces positive when there's just so much to review. And if I go back to the beginning of my community career 20 years ago, part of the discussion that we often had and we often had to plan for was, do we do pre-moderation or post-moderation? Meaning, does everything get double checked first before it even goes live, or do we wait until after it's live to check things out and make sure that they're all clean and clear, right? And that was a real debate. Well, now we know, just scale wise, speed wise, we just can't manage that. That's not going to be something that most communities most of the time will do, because it's too intense, right? We can't double check every single piece of content on a community of tens of thousands of people posting tens of thousands of messages per day, right? There's not enough human workforce to support that, much less budget to support it. But we've also done a good job of thinking about, how do we empower our users to report things? How do we create culture to drive down the necessity for moderation? But moderation is always there, right? That need is always there. And so we've been talking about, how do we automate some of those things for years and years, right? And we've added lots of things like content filters and queues that automatically put certain flagged posts in front of a human moderator to verify. We've done things like automating certain types of posts or certain types of words in posts to pull that post down and put it into a review queue. So is that AI? Not in the same way we're talking about, but it's the same type of automation. It's the same type of thinking. How do we take these really basic, simple processes that require humanity in a way? They require thought and depth, but they also are fairly basic, right? There's those sorts of tasks. When we put human moderators in front of them, we really work hard to try and think about, how do we keep this human from getting terribly bored after a few days, right? Much less a few years. And this is an ongoing, every day, all day sort of task. So how do we keep those folks at a engaged level? And I think that this is one of those times where, as we think about AI and how does it apply to some of the community pieces, it is, how do we start to do better at the automation? Because I've seen things like a word like message getting flagged. Message has ASS in it, right? And ass is on the banned word list. Well, what happens there? That has happened. That's been an ongoing thing with moderation schemes for a long time, is how do you start to figure out context as well? What's the difference between cancer site talking about breasts and somebody being really rude and using that word, right? And I think that's where AI becomes really exciting for these sorts of solutions and issues, is that it can really start to think about context in a way that humans do, and that traditional technology has not been able to.
Okay. So for you today in 2025, what's changed since we've been talking a lot about generative AI? Like on your day-to-day job, any specific task that you used to do, you no longer need to do it? Anything new that came in? Did that change a lot, or is it just to be more efficient on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So I like to talk about the word efficiency in this context, because efficiency can be me being able to do what I need to do much better, much faster, much more in depth, much more interestingly. That's efficient. As much as what often gets associated with efficiency is just, my 8-hour workday goes into 2 hours instead, right? Because I get rid of all the quote unquote fluff, right? But I think that type of efficiency is the wrong way to think about it. It's too focused on what, so many executives are doing right now, which is saying, oh, I have a call center of 40 people. If we implement AI, I can lay off half of them. Well, sure, but what does that really do to the long-term experience? Does it actually create any actual value, or does it just bump your stock price for a minute this quarter until next quarter is problematic because you've gotten rid of all your humans? And as every product becomes more complex, those humans are relevant and important. For me personally, I mentioned a second ago, but I've been talking a lot about AI as a critical and creative partner. And if I think about it as, oh, I can, I write a LinkedIn newsletter, and I try and come up with content on as regular a basis as I can, given my consulting schedule and given my family life and my workload and all the pieces. Right, I try and do as much content as I can. If I'm doing it all on my own, sometimes the content can be limited to just what I'm thinking about in that moment, right? I need a partner. If you and I are talking, you'll give me 4 ideas, whether you realize it or not, just through the conversation itself, right? But getting on your schedule might be tough. It might be really tough if our schedules don't match, our time zones don't match, and so suddenly I've got ChatGPT as a creative and critical partner. I literally was driving home. This is a true story. I was driving home about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and I was listening to another podcast, the Pivot Business podcast, right? Not necessarily about AI in particular, but they mentioned some concept about AI, and it triggered something in my brain, right? I wasn't exactly sure what that idea was, but it triggered something, and so I made a voice note of that thought that I had, which made no sense to me. I didn't really have a whole lot of concept of what I was thinking and what was important there. And I came home and I plugged that one sentence into ChatGPT and said nothing other than, what did I mean here? And the response was 3 different options of what that might have been. All 3 of them were fantastic options, right? And I didn't just say, okay, I'm done now. Or I didn't say, okay, write an article, copy, paste, and post it. It gave me thoughts to then go in different directions. Just like if you and I were talking and I said, I'm not sure what's going on here. And you could have said, here's 3 ideas for what that might mean. And I could go, oh, okay, great. But the efficiency came from the fact that I had a thought, I was able to turn it into something important and relevant. And that allowed me to then go, oh, okay, I've got ideas sparked. Now off I go. I write the article. I have ChatGPT clean it up for me. It made a few suggestions that I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that piece. Yeah, let me tweak that now that I'm thinking about it. And the article that came out was vastly better in a much shorter period of time than it would have taken me otherwise. If I could have gotten to that article at all, because I couldn't, there was no trigger that was really like, oh, this is the very specific thing to do. And I think changing those workflows becomes really efficient in what I need to do for my output. But it's not just about time saving, right? It is about quality. It is about efficiency of creating new things that would have taken me a lot longer to come up with or ideate on myself or let stew in the back of my head for a while. And not to take away from that, that process of letting things stew, but also I don't always have the time to do that. And so, it definitely is making me more efficient personally. And I'm sure others as well.
So, how do you plug AI into customer experience, customer engagement, and community? Can AI ever really replace that human connection? What do you think? What's your take on AI plus, community and engagement?
Yeah, and it's a question I love talking about these days because, again, as a community guy, you're asking why am I involved in AI? But I've started to develop a practice I call AIX, AI Experience Design, and it's basically the very simple version of what that means is it's designing the relationship between the human and the intelligent AI system. Because the reality is we have sort of this new thing, right? We've had relationships between humans and we've had technology that delivers whatever it's delivering. But now we've got something in between those two that, AI isn't necessarily, replacing or meant to replace or should be replacing the human, but becoming more humanistic in the way that it's designed, that it acts, and really thinking about that relationship between the human and the system is important, because the reality is that, now that AI is starting to behave, suggest, have tone, whether we like it or not, we ascribe meaning to that, right? We ascribe a certain level of value to those things based on tone, and that's an important part of this process that goes beyond, the very important but somewhat separate practice of like UI UX design, right, or even conversational design. Those are still outcome oriented things. UX is about making sure that when I go to use the tool, the features are clear, that my understanding of where they are, it makes sense, that the buttons do what they're supposed to do, those sorts of things. But what happens in the overall experience of using ChatGPT or Claude or anybody else, right? There's a process to the way that humans work that we need a little bit of warm up, right? We need things to work a certain way during the experience, and we need some wind down as well once we've used the experience to create sort of a full circle process. Because if we're, right now we're thinking so much is about just what the tools do, how good the models are, what the outputs are, which is important. ChatGPT is clearly using, doing some thought around what the tone is. But one of the examples I give is that if you're using a AI interview tool and there's a semi-robotic voice there, it takes a minute to kind of warm up to that voice, right? And mentally to kind of shift into, I'm being interviewed by an AI. So if you're being interviewed, if you're applying for a job, and right now some of those application processes are now including an AI bot first interview pass, right or wrong, good or bad, whether that's helpful, not helpful, that's a different discussion. I think it can be one or all of those things, right? But the process of getting you warmed up has to be thought about, because the difficulty of us shifting into a mode of talking to the robot as though it were a human to fully represent who I am as a candidate, a job candidate, uh, that takes a minute, right? We have to kind of settle in, just like you and I might have some small talk before we start recording this podcast. And then after it's done, we sort of say, hey, thank you very much. I appreciate the time. Those sorts of things. If we're going to create humanistic experience, we have to move beyond just the features and the functions and think about the entirety of what that human in the system is doing. We always talk about human in the loop, but what is the human doing? How are they feeling? What are the lead ups and lead outs that are important to that human in the loop experience, right?
For someone who is part of an online community, for a brand, for artists, for, I don't know, sports team, what do you think those people think of the invasion of AI into those communities? Is it? I'm not saying is it good or is it bad, but do you think it can break the magic that could happen within that community?
It absolutely can, absolutely 100% can, and we're already starting to see some of these things where it's getting better, but the Google AI answers, for instance, and that's not a community, but it's the same principle, that when we first started seeing those suggestions from Google's AI, oh God, some of them were just absolutely terrible, and it felt so bad that it was like, why are you even putting this here? You're just getting in my way. Right now I have to scroll further down the page, to get to the results. I just want it in and out, right? I think in community, my mantra for community building for 20 something years now has been, everybody goes home happy. The idea of building successful brand communities or company supported communities is that everybody in that process has to go home happy. Well, what does happy mean? It's a good question. Both sides have different answers to that question, right? Me as a company, I may be really important with selling, really interested in selling boxes or retention rates or business growth or whatever, right? Nothing wrong with that. That's what I'm here for. But none of those fans or community members have a whole lot of interest in my bottom line. That's not what they're there for. They're there for, connection to the brand or the product, to share with their peers about what they're doing with that product or those services, whatever it might be, right? To get help or to get ideas or whatever those things are. And those those two worlds being different is perfectly fine as long as you're being very clear with each other about what's important to you, right? And that everybody goes home happy mantra is what I tell companies a lot about, as you're thinking about community and how to build or support customer and fan communities. It's really important to think about, how do I share with them what's important to me? How do I be bold enough? Because a lot of companies don't like saying, look, our retention rates are down. We need to drive retention rates. That's what I'm asking for from you. But in return, I very clearly have listened. I've paid attention. I've talked to you, direct customer engagement, right? I understand that from the community needs, you guys want more of this kind of product, or you're having a problem with this that you want addressed, or you want to see us as the company show up in these spaces more often, whatever it is. But being able to say, here's what I need, and I understand what you need, and here's what I'm going to do to help with that, is how you create this bond between customer and company. So I say that because back to the question of, can AI ruin the magic? It absolutely can, but not because it's AI, or not because it's technology, or not because it's just cold in and of itself, because it's, semi-humanistic, right? It's because it gets implemented in ways that are only beneficial to the company. More often than not, we see these solutions being implemented just to help the company, right? And it doesn't help, and it doesn't even think about how to help the other participants in this relationship, right? And it is a relationship between fan and company. And any relationship is a two-way bond, not just a one-way bond. If you have a one-way bond, it is not a relationship, right? It's somebody talking to somebody else. Maybe they listen, maybe they don't. But if we're building relationship, which is my whole entire career summed up, is building relationships between companies and their passionate customers, then with AI, why are we implementing it? How are we implementing it? Where are we implementing it? In order to provide benefit to both company and customer. And so when the magic is lost is often when the company's thinking about it only for themselves, not for what it's going to do and help the users to solve a problem the users have been raising, to provide delight and joy to them in a way that they didn't expect, those sorts of things, right? So I don't think it's inherently a bad thing, just like I don't think any other part of the technology process is inherently bad, right? Email newsletters are not inherently bad. We may get annoyed by them because they never add value for us when we get them in our inbox, right? If they add value, then, I get plenty of newsletters all day long that I really enjoy reading, or at least skimming sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. An offer, a 5% offer of 4 products out of a suite of 20 products is not a very good email offer. 50% off of the entire catalog is definitely what I want to pay attention to, right? So it's not really about these tools. It's about how you go about implementing them to create real value for customers based on your clear and direct and vocal understanding of what they need and what they're asking for.
So, Jake, based on your experience, is there anything brands should not do when implementing AI in customer communities? Any bad practices that no one should replicate?
Yeah, and I think this is an extension of the discussion we just had. It really should be about adding value and delight and joy, right, to the process. I think right now we are thinking about AI as a replacement, not an augmentation. I think the way that we are adding AI really needs to be thought of as things to help the human, not to replace the human, right? And I've been thinking a lot about Star Wars lately, because I had this thought about Star Wars and how different Luke Skywalker and Han Solo talk to each other as two humans. And even in 1977, when this movie came out, where AI was far from something that was actually possible, they still wrote and directed and acted differently with the robots and the humans than the humans to humans, right? And that's okay. But I think how we go about designing these systems so that we really understand how to create the humanity, and the humanity may be making things that our robots sound more robotic, right? Just as much as trying to make them more humanistic, or more human-like, right? I don't think everything has to be disguised as humanistic. or is disguised as humans, right? If I'm on a chatbot, I want to know I'm on a chatbot with an agent or with an AI system. I want that AI system to have some level of understanding of frustration, right? If we're going to create AI, make sure that if I'm saying phrases that are clearly frustration phrases, that it starts to react differently to me, right? That's humanistic. It's not trying to replace a human, but it is being more humanistic and really being empathetic to my experience, right? And understanding those experiences right now are not always perfect. They're not going to always be perfect, and humans are not perfect. And there's a certain charm in the imperfection of not being perfect. How do we start to build some of those things into these systems?
Do you think that community building is still a strategic priority for brands today? Is it still something they want to invest in?
I'll answer that in two ways. The first and foremost answer is this sort of engagement and this sort of customer focus should always exist, no matter what the technology is.
Mm-hmm.
And without it, you're missing a massive and significantly important part of differentiation between you and your customers, or your competitors. Without that differentiation, what are you really there doing? Right? You're delivering something that becomes commoditized almost instantly and therefore replaceable almost instantly. The one thing that makes companies more attractive, more interesting, create more loyalty and advocacy is this customer relationship, right? And the reality is we're seeing a lot of companies react, maybe overreact to the potential of cost savings, right? That again, this is the example that we're hearing so much is I have a call center. There's 40 people there. If I put AI in place, I can fire 20 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Duolingo folks saying we're AI first, so we're going to try everything with AI programmers first. Okay, no problem. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, right? The question though is, what are you doing to reallocate resources and not just think about cost savings? So, for instance, if you have the ability to make my customer experience better by removing 20 of the agents from the calls, from the call lines, so that I don't have to call in, that I can do better things with the chat bots or the online tools or even the automated phone systems, whatever it is, and I can have a really good positive experience, great, go do it, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, in some ways, I'd prefer the system, the IVR system that I use when I call in, to be smarter, much smarter, and not necessarily get in front of a human who I've got to kind of restart the entire conversation after I pushed all the buttons, right? If we make those processes better and it creates a better customer experience, that's good for the company. But the problem is we're stopping there, right? What happens to those 20 people? I'm hoping that they get reallocated to do more interesting things, to help encourage customers to do more with the products that we have, right? So many products are only unlocking 20% of the value most of the time, right? Or 30% or whatever the number is, right? But there's so many products that if you knew what to do with them better and more deeply, you could do a lot of really amazing things with them. How do we start to really think about not just removing or replacing the humans in the process, but to reallocate them in ways that make more sense? And, if we think about our own work days, if our 8-hour workday can be augmented by AI, and now we only really have 2 hours worth of true work to do because we got rid of so much of the grinding work, we're not having to write a bunch of timesheets. It just happens, right? Then what do we do with the other 6 hours? The goal should be to reallocate those 6 hours to be doing more innovation, more customer engagement, more interesting things with the customer relationship, instead of just saying, great, now we can fire 10 people.
So you raised an interesting point, because how do you measure the value of AI in customer engagement? Like, is there, I don't know, any KPIs you can share?
Yeah. And this is, in some ways, this is no different than what I've been saying for 20 years with community work, which is there are community specific metrics that matter, right? If you have a community platform that you run as a company, there are metrics that are the basic numbers that are important. How many users do we have? How often do they come back? Those sorts of things. Those are important. But if you're not stopping and saying, what are the company metrics and how am I supporting those? Your job is short, right? The value of the community is limited, and the timeline for how long that community program is going to actually be able to run is extremely limited. because you're missing the point.
My question, Jake, was more about like the value of an AI program. Like, is there a way to measure the quality or the success of an AI program in customer engagement or customer success?
Yeah, I think there is, but again, I think it goes back to it starting. The starting point for that measurement, whether it's AI or community, is what is the company needing, right? Because if your goal is to create AI specific metrics that don't attach themselves to the company metrics, it doesn't really matter, right? It's a very limited focus for how long that AI program is going to be funded, right? If you create a chatbot and it works really well for chatbot specs, but it doesn't really do much for the bottom line business, that thing's going to come off at some point because it's going to be just a waste of resources. Every CEO has their top 3 issues that they're dealing with that year that they're interested in talking about, and if you're not tapped into what those are, then you're missing the boat, right? And if one of those is retention, for instance, then we can look at AI programs through the lens of retention. What are the problems? Is it, if we look at the customer journey, there's certain times where onboarding is really rough and, people get started off with a bad experience, or after 6 months, they feel like they've run out of interest in the program. Being able to insert the AI tools to help along those points of the friction, the bad friction in the journey, can be really important. But we're in that stage of technology, like any new technology, where it's new and it's cool and it's exciting, and so we're just trying to shove it anywhere that it might go. And I think part of this is slowing down to say, what is it really helping the business? And more importantly, do you even understand what the business really needs overall, outside of your department, outside of your function, outside of the technology itself?
So let's say a brand comes to you and says, "Hey, we want to launch an AI-driven fan experience." What's your first reaction? Where should we get started?
My first question is why?
Mhm.
How does this help the customer? Right. I would also start to say, point to the part of the customer journey where the pain is. Right. Just the same way, if I go into a doctor and I make this joke about point to where the pain is, but if I go in and say, "Hey, I'm not feeling good," he doesn't start putting me through scans. He says, "Where's it hurt?"
Mhm.
Right. What kind of pain do you have? What is the history of pain that you may have had in the past? And is this an extension of that? Right. We'd make those strategic questions first. I'm hearing a lot of, and this goes for community. It goes for core business strategy. If you talk to any consultant anywhere, this is a familiar axiom. It doesn't have much to do with AI specifically. It has to do with the fact that people in companies tend to react with, "Oh, I want to implement this." But why? Well, because it seems interesting, because everybody else is doing it, because our competitors have one, because it'll be something good to tell my CEO that we implemented this quarter, that sort of thing. And really being clear first and foremost about why are we talking about this in the first place. We do hear a lot of things where people will come and say, excuse me, people will come and say to me, um, we want to help with customer support, and so therefore we want to implement AI. And it's okay, cool, but what does that mean? What help do you need? Are you understaffed? Are you having really bad CSAT numbers? Are you taking too much time on the phones and the phones are too expensive? Is peer-to-peer support in the customer community not really working? Um, and you'll hear me not talk about AI solutions specifically, because I don't really believe that AI solutions specifically are that much different than, the community question. Oh, I want to implement a community. My first question is always why, right? What does your audience look like? What do they need and want? Now, once you get that, then it almost reveals itself, right? It almost says, oh, there's a huge part of, again, the onboarding example. There's a huge pain point in the onboarding example. And if we could automate this and make this feel more humanistic, even though we don't have to have humans in the loop every single day for every single user, man, we can overcome this pain point really fast. And that will solve the business problem we're really dealing with.
On your job, Jake, how deep are you with technology? When you know the why, are you here to advise on different type of LLMs and technology and software? Or you just take a big step back and say, "Hey, I'm more like on the strategy level. Make sure you make the right decisions to help your customers. Like, where do you see yourself?
Yeah, definitely on the strategic and implementation tactics level, right? So my consulting work for a long time really is about helping people to understand why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? How do we document that in a way that when I turn it over to engineers, they know exactly what we're doing? When it's built, we know if it's on track or not. The process of building it includes customers in a way that helps to ensure that uh, that it's designed in a way that's really going to benefit them, right? And not just sort of, collecting their input at the beginning or verifying that what we built is good at the end. But as we're developing, how do we get those voices involved to keep them involved throughout the process in the way that makes the most sense for everybody, both sides of that equation.
Okay.
But it is I'm not answering which LLM or which model you need to use, or how to go about the technology. There's a world of really intelligent developers right now that are doing that kind of work. It's very similar to product management, right? That product managers are really looking at specs and concepts and designs and points of friction, that sort of thing, and then working with the developers with enough of an understanding of how the technology works that they can really help guide those technologists, those engineers, to develop something really great, but also looking at it from the holistic standpoint. So that's really where I come at it.
So you know that everything is going so fast these days with AI and technology. Where do you see community engagement heading over the next 2 years?
It's so hard to predict even the 2 years question, right? Because if you'd asked me 6 months ago if we're going to be where we're at now, I might have said, no, it'll take a little longer. Sam Altman's already talking about, coding being better done by AI by the end of the year, right? But I do think that I don't know where customer engagement's going to be exactly in 2 years, but I do know that if we don't change the way that we're thinking about customer engagement and the value of customer engagement in a system that includes AI, then in 2 years, there's going to be a lot of companies that are either out of business or struggling because they haven't done that work. I think in a world of AI, humanity becomes even more important than it ever has been. The not just making the AI more humanistic, but making the experiences more human, right? How do we make sure that we are creating products that don't just solve the problem and then call it a day, but are solving problems in ways that create advocacy and loyalty, that create a brand connection, that create better solutions and opportunities? Uh, because customer engagement is a differentiator, is a huge differentiator for companies across the board. But also, we need to really be thinking about how the engagement piece fits into our experiences, right? In 2 years, I doubt that we'll have, and I may be wrong about this in 2 years, but I doubt that we'll be having, mass replacement of so many functions, right? There still needs to be thought processes around chemical engineering and what chemicals are needed, and people still have to have innovative ideas. But what happens to the products that can be created when AI is helping those chemical engineers uh, ideate and brainstorm and make comparisons between one chemical and another faster, so that we now see all kinds of opportunities? The customer engagement piece is going to be really critical in how do we listen to what that opportunity of speed gives us from an innovation standpoint. How do we rethink the way that we're engaging with customers to be innovative together, right? When we can come up with 5 new chemicals that nobody's ever thought about before for adhesives, what can we stick together more effectively, right? How do we work in partnership with our customers in a much deeper way is going to be more important than it ever has been, right? It's because we're not going to be in a world, I don't think, where decades ago it really was a company would kind of go away, they'd talk to their customers or they'd talk to the world, and they'd say, okay, I have a problem, now I'm going to disappear for a while, come up with an idea, and then present it and push it with marketing, and hopefully somebody buys it, right? But the question now is, when that process went from months or often years or decades even, now it's going to days or weeks. well, what do we do with that time? Like that speed needs to have this connection to customers so that they can be saying, okay, now that I get this, I'm changing the way I'm innovating, and I'm doing that in partnership with the companies creating the products I'm innovating with. What do we do? And I think companies are going to have to take a whole lot more effort into how they train their customers to use the increased flow of products, right? And that's a connection. That's a fundamental connection of how we think about company to customer relationship.
Okay, well, thank you, Jake. Or maybe one last question for you, because we hear that there are many layoffs, specifically in the tech industry. Are you concerned about the people working in customer engagement? Is there anything you want to tell them? For example, maybe they should, upskill or reskill. What do you see the future of the workplace in this type of field?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. I think there's 10 different answers if you talk about 10 different fields, right? But within customer engagement specifically, I don't think there's a lot of concern for the space. I think there's a lot of concern for the ability to be in the space, right? I think the upskilling for customer engagement professionals is to really start being clear about what AI can and can't do, how to talk about what it can and can't do to people in the companies that they're working in or for. I think the customer engagement techniques are going to change. I think the need to really have a good pitch on why this is a differentiator of how to create loyalty, of how to go about humanizing the AI experience. And the idea of AIX, the experience design piece, needs to be interwoven in every customer experience or customer engagement professional in all the work that they do, how they think about things. And moving forward, that's going to be a given in the space. You may not like it. You may not want to do it, but if you're going to stay in customer engagement, that has to be part of it. Those AIX principles have to be baked into everything that we're doing. And I think there's going to be a huge increase in need for customer engagement as things get more AI centric. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that we take all the skills we have today and they automatically and solely transfer into the new future. I think we are uniquely positioned as community and customer engagement professionals to be really valuable in the new space. But I also think we have to rethink what we do and how we do it to maintain that relevancy.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jake. So at the end of each episode, the guest answers the question posed by the previous guest. After that, you'll have the opportunity to ask a question for the next guest. Are you ready?
I am. This was the most nerve-wracking part of the interview was what's the question going to be? So go ahead.
So here's your question, courtesy of Igor Otaneu, who is the co-founder and CEO of Volt AI, and that's a company specialized in intelligence video surveillance. And we can listen to his question right now.
We've seen how we went from an agrarian society to an industrialized society. And then we've seen what happened with, nuclear energy. And now we're seeing what is happening with artificial intelligence and robotics. And arguably, that's like the next step in technological evolution. What will happen after AI and robotics? I would love to hear that prediction. What will be the next giant leap in technology?
Oh, man. That is a very good question.
It is a very open question.
Yeah, and so I will give an answer that won't necessarily be technology oriented or focused, but involves technology. So I think that the future that we will live in will have a lot of C3POs, right? To use my Star Wars answer. We're seeing the rise of AI as we think about it today. It's ChatGPT, right? It's text-based, or, we're creating images, that sort of thing. But we're seeing a rapid move towards creating more humanistic robots, right? And whether we're watching the Boston Dynamics things that are creating robots that can really function and walk upstairs, backflip and all that sort of thing. But we're also seeing more and more small pieces of technology that are really important for creating valuable robots, like haptic sensors that allow the sense of touch for robots, right? The visual pieces, all the human senses are starting to become integrated AI is wrapping all those things together. The technology is improving dramatically and rapidly. And, from what we're seeing in China already, they're starting to use robots as things like caretakers for the elderly, right? And this is still very early, but I don't think it's that far off. It's certainly in our lifetimes that we'll start to see, these actual robots show up, these humanoid type of robots show up in our houses doing tasks that we didn't want to do, which I, for one, certainly welcome, because if they do the dishes for me, man, I am going to be ecstatic. But I think that future is much closer than any of us think it is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. So now what question would you like to pose for the next guest?
So I have been talking a lot about within the AIX principles that emotion is a first-class metric, right? That we have to pay more attention to the idea of emotion being as important as, success rates, completion rates, quantity rates. So I'm curious for the next guest, how does emotion get measured? And how do we think about emotion being a first-class metric?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jake. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. This was a lot of fun.
And that wraps up another episode of AI Experience. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform. Your support counts, and your comments can really help share this experience with others. You can also visit the website ai-experience.io to find out more. See you soon for a new episode.